I'm Lena, 30 years old, and my concert pianist dreams shattered with my hands. My sister Chloe, an opera singer, convinced our parents my recovery was too costly. Your expenses are an unbearable burden, she'd sigh. The final blow, she used my rehab funds for her guaranteed new music venture. That moment changed everything. I decided her harmony needed a serious discord. My life as a concert pianist, once filled with the promise of grand concert halls and thunderous applause, had been irrevocably altered by a freak accident. A sudden fall backstage, a carelessly placed piece of stage equipment, and a sickening crunch that echoed in my mind for weeks, that's all it took. My hands, once agile and expressive, were now a mess of stitches, swelling, and nerve damage. The diagnosis was grim: extensive tendon and nerve damage, requiring multiple surgeries and an indefinite period of rehabilitation, with no guarantee of regaining full function, let alone the dexterity needed for professional piano playing. My parents, Robert and Susan, were initially distraught, but as the medical bills mounted and my prognosis remained uncertain, their concern morphed into something less sympathetic. That's when my younger sister, Chloe, an aspiring opera singer whose career had yet to take flight, began her subtle campaign. She'd come to visit, offering what seemed like comfort, but her words were laced with insidious suggestions. Lena, honey, those medical costs are astronomical. She'd sigh dramatically to our parents, always within earshot, and honestly, given her age, can she really return to the stage? Think of the investment. She began to paint my recovery not as a possibility, but as a black hole of financial drain. Then came the bombshell, Chloe's guaranteed new music venture. She presented it to our parents as an unmissable opportunity, a way for them to recoup some of their losses and invest in a sure thing. The twist: a substantial portion of the funds she needed were to be diverted from my ongoing rehabilitation budget. Lena will heal in her own time, she'd insisted to them, but this is time sensitive. This is a real chance for the family's artistic legacy to continue through me. My parents, emotionally vulnerable and financially strained, fell for it. The moment they signed the papers, allocating my funds to her dreams, something inside me snapped. The physical pain was immense, but the emotional betrayal was a searing agony that surpassed it. It was then, lying in my hospital bed, that I decided Chloe's carefully constructed harmony was about to face a very public, very painful discord. If you're enjoying this story already, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe to hear what happened later. The sterile white walls of the hospital room became a crucible, forging a new, harder version of myself. The accident, a carelessly placed piece of stage equipment that sent me tumbling during a pre-concert check, had rendered my once agile hands into swollen, stitched-up caricatures. Complex regional pain syndrome, nerve damage, tendon tears, the diagnoses were a litany of broken dreams. My life, once a vibrant crescendo of practice rooms and concert halls, was now a sustained, agonizing note of pain. My parents, Robert and Susan, were initially heartbroken. They'd brought me flowers, held my hand, and whispered reassurances about the best specialists and endless therapy. But as the weeks bled into months, and the bills from multiple surgeries and intensive rehabilitation mounted, their faces began to show not just worry, but a subtle, growing weariness. The word cost hung unspoken in the air during their visits, a silent burden that seemed to outweigh even my suffering. Then came Chloe, my younger sister, 3 years my junior. Chloe, with her dramatic flair and a voice she believed was destined for the Metropolitan Opera, had always been the designated star in our family narrative. Where I toiled away at the piano for 8 hours a day, meticulously perfecting my craft, Chloe often breezed through 2-hour vocal practices, relying on her perceived innate brilliance and more often my parents' unwavering financial backing for coaches, auditions, and lavish costumes. Now, with my career abruptly halted, she saw her opportunity to fully step into the family's artistic spotlight and perhaps eclipse me forever. "Oh, Lena, darling," she'd coo, perched delicately on the edge of my hospital bed, her voice a practiced blend of sympathy and thinly veiled condescension. She'd reach out a manicured hand, not to touch my bandaged ones, but to pat my arm lightly. "It's just so awful what happened. All those years, all that dedication. Gone just like that?" Her eyes, however, held a glint of something akin to triumph, a subtle, almost imperceptible widening when she thought my pain-dulled gaze wasn't fixed on her. She started talking about her own big break, a new, cutting-edge opera production she was conceptualizing, something revolutionary that would fuse classical opera with contemporary electronic music. She spoke of attracting a younger audience, of securing prestigious venues, of a project so groundbreaking it simply couldn't fail. She made it sound not just like a passion project, but a guaranteed goldmine. My parents, already reeling from the emotional and financial burden of my ongoing treatment, listened with eager, desperate ears. Chloe, sensing their vulnerability, spun tales of future riches, of a family legacy that would now flow through her, not me. She painted a vivid picture where her success would not only justify their continued investment in her, but would somehow, magically, offset my ever increasing medical expenses, which she constantly reminded them were astronomical and never ending. Think of it, mother, father, she'd implore, her voice soaring to a dramatic crescendo, as if addressing an audience in a grand opera house. Lena's path, sadly, is uncertain. The doctors can't promise anything, can they? But my path, it's clear, it's vibrant, it's the future. And with your support, we can make this a true family triumph, a legacy that will span generations. She began to subtly undermine my recovery, casting doubt on the efficacy of my physical therapy. Those exercises seem so slow, don't they, Lena? She'd say, knowing full well I was making incremental, agonizing progress. Are you sure this much therapy is truly necessary? It's draining everything. Or with a saccharine smile to our parents, the doctors are really milking this, aren't they? All those specialists, all those fancy machines, for hands that may never quite be the same. Her words were like tiny needles pricking at the fragile balloon of hope I was trying to inflate. She presented my situation as a bottomless pit, a drain on our family's resources, while her venture was the golden goose, the sure bet, the only logical investment for a family that needed a win. My parents, blinded by their desperate desire for one of their daughters to achieve undeniable success, and perhaps weary of the endless cycle of hospital visits and grim medical reports, began to waver. I could see the internal struggle in their eyes, the quiet calculations behind their forced smiles. The shift in their focus was agonizingly slow, then terrifyingly swift. The day Chloe came into my hospital room with a thick sheaf of legal documents, my heart sank. She presented them to my parents, who sat awkwardly in the visitor chairs, already pre-filled with figures that made my head spin. It was an investment proposal for her new music venture, one that required a substantial portion of our family's liquid assets, assets that for years had been earmarked for my long-term care and any future medical needs, a trust set up by my grandmother for my well-being. Chloe talked quickly, her words a torrent of impressive-sounding financial jargon and artistic promises. It's a limited-time opportunity, a pre-IPO investment, mother, father. The returns will be exponential. Think of the future, my parents, weary and emotionally drained, signed without truly scrutinizing the fine print, swayed by Chloe's impassioned plea that this was their last great chance to secure their future and leave a mark. Lena will heal, Chloe reassured them, her voice dripping with false concern, but this is now. This is time-sensitive. This is our legacy. She even leaned over, placing a gentle kiss on my forehead, a gesture so uncharacteristic it sent a shiver down my spine. I lay there numb as the pen scratched across the paper, signing away not just my financial security, but the last vestige of trust I had in my family. The physical pain in my hands was a dull throb compared to the crushing agony of that moment. My hands might be broken, but their betrayal felt like a shattered soul. I closed my eyes, picturing Chloe's triumphant smirk, and in that dark moment, a new, cold resolve began to crystallize within me. The music of my life had been interrupted, but a new, darker symphony, one of quiet vengeance, was just beginning. The hospital room, once a place of hopeful recovery, morphed into a silent crucible, forging a new, harder version of myself. Discharged with a cumbersome brace on my right hand and a future shrouded in medical uncertainty, I found a grim solace in the methodical rhythm of physical therapy. Each painful stretch, each agonizing repetition with a resistance band, was a small, defiant rebellion against the despair that threatened to consume me. My former life, filled with the vibrant energy of practice rooms, the smell of aged sheet music, and the electric hum of a grand piano, felt like a distant, unattainable dream. Now my days were dictated by appointments with Dr. Evelyn Reed, my compassionate physical therapist, and Dr. Ben Carter, a brilliant neurologist specializing in nerve regeneration. They spoke in measured tones of realistic expectations, of small, incremental victories, of a long and arduous journey with no guaranteed destination. I listened, absorbed every instruction, determined to reclaim even a sliver of my former dexterity. Every twitch of a finger, every faint tremor of sensation felt like a battle won, a silent defiance against the circumstances that had tried to crush me. Chloe, meanwhile, was on a different trajectory entirely, her star seemingly on the ascendant. Our parents, having fully committed their remaining capital to her new music venture, were utterly consumed by it. My recovery became a mere footnote, a minor inconvenience overshadowed by Chloe's grand ambitions and ceaseless demands. They talked endlessly about her vision, her genius, her unprecedented talent. My own phone, once buzzing with their daily calls and check-ins, grew quiet. The texts were perfunctory, polite inquiries about my well-being. "How are you feeling, dear?" Quickly followed by enthusiastic updates on Chloe's latest achievement. A successful funding round, a prestigious venue secured, a glowing review from an obscure online music blog. Lena, darling, Chloe just signed the most incredible recording contract, my mother would exclaim during one of our brief, surface level phone calls, her voice brimming with a pride she rarely, if ever, directed at me. There was never an accompanying question about how my hand was progressing after a particularly grueling therapy session, or if the lingering nerve pain was manageable. My father would nod sagely in the background, engrossed in Chloe's latest press release, which seemed to be permanently open on his tablet. It was as if my accident, my pain, my very existence had been relegated to a minor key in their lives, a forgotten, dull background drone, while Chloe's opera was the main event, the thrilling, attention-grabbing crescendo. I maintained a facade of quiet resignation. I didn't complain, didn't argue. I simply nodded, offered vague, noncommittal responses, and withdrew further into myself, creating a protective emotional shell. My therapist, Dr. Carter, with his keen observational skills, noticed my emotional detachment, the quiet despair simmering beneath my calm exterior. During one session, he paused, his gaze empathetic. Lena, he asked gently, you seem very focused on the physical healing, which is vital, but what about the emotional healing? This is a significant trauma, not just to your hands, but to your identity, your sense of self. I hesitated, then confided in him, carefully, vaguely, about the shift in my family's priorities, the feeling of being overlooked, of being a burden, of watching my life savings redirected to a sister who had always eclipsed me. He listened patiently, without judgment. It sounds like you're experiencing a profound form of emotional abandonment and betrayal, he observed softly. That's a wound that needs tending as much as your physical injuries. He suggested I explore avenues for processing my feelings, perhaps a support group, or speaking with a counselor specializing in family dynamics. I politely declined, not ready to expose the raw, festering depth of my pain, especially the betrayal, to anyone beyond Dr. Carter. I wasn't ready to cry or scream or show any vulnerability that might be misconstrued as weakness. Instead, I channeled my burgeoning anger and deep-seated hurt into a new form of research, a silent rebellion that no one, least of all Chloe, would ever suspect. While Chloe was immersed in rehearsals, glamorous publicity stunts, and fawning interviews, I delved into the opaque world of legal precedents, corporate structures, and financial due diligence. My damaged hands, while still struggling with a traditional keyboard, slowly adapted, learning new ways to navigate screens, to highlight sections of online documents with a stylus, to send discreet emails using voice-to-text software. I consulted anonymously with legal forums, piecing together the intricate legal framework of Chloe's new music venture. I discovered that while my parents had invested a significant sum, Chloe had structured the company in such a way that she retained nearly all the intellectual property and a disproportionate share of the profits. My parents, in their eagerness for a family triumph, had signed away their financial leverage for a paltry return, convinced they were securing the family's artistic future. It was a cold, calculated move, one that highlighted Chloe's ruthless ambition and my parents' startling, almost willful, blind faith. I began to gather information, not for immediate confrontation, but for a future, unseen moment, a moment when the stage would be set for her own dramatic fall. I downloaded public records, cross-referenced financial statements, and meticulously documented every instance of Chloe's escalating expenditures, comparing them to the modest projections in her initial business plan. I discovered she was not only funding her lavish lifestyle, designer clothes, exclusive parties, extravagant dinners. With the venture capital she had swindled from our parents, but was also secretly paying for private vocal lessons with a world-renowned coach in Milan, a coach whose fees were astronomical and far beyond the budget she had presented to our parents. She was building her personal empire, not on talent or hard work, but on the foundation of my stolen recovery funds, on the very pain that crippled me. The more I unearthed, the colder my resolve became. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about integrity, about a lifetime of being treated as second best, as an afterthought. My sister had taken my vulnerability, my physical suffering, and had brazenly turned it into her personal stepping stone to fame. But a new melody was forming in my mind, a subtle, intricate composition of justice. It wouldn't be loud or dramatic like Chloe's operas. It would be a quiet, precise note that would resonate with devastating effect. I continued my therapy, continued my quiet research, and waited patiently for the perfect moment to strike my discordant chord. The world might think my music was silenced, but the truth was I was simply composing my masterpiece in a different key, a hidden symphony of retribution. As Chloe's premiere approached, the buzz around her new music venture swelled into a veritable roar. Posters plastered across the city, featuring Chloe's glamorous, pensive face adorned bus stops and billboards. Interviews on national morning shows showcased her articulate confidence, her seemingly boundless artistic vision. Even a segment on a local arts documentary, titled The Diva's Debut, painted her as a trailblazing force in the opera world. My parents were practically levitating with pride, their conversations revolving entirely around their brilliant daughter. My mother even hinted, with a hopeful glint in her eye, that Chloe's imminent success might finally allow them to retire comfortably, neatly sidestepping the uncomfortable truth that a significant portion of their retirement nest egg was now tied up in Chloe's increasingly precarious endeavor. They dismissed any subtle criticisms they heard as jealousy or misguided criticism. People just don't understand true artistic innovation, darling, my mother assured Chloe over the phone one evening, completely unaware of the precise and meticulously sourced information that had fueled mounting doubts among industry insiders. I continued my physical therapy with unwavering dedication, each stretch and exercise a silent affirmation of my resolve. Dr. Reed praised my tenacity, noting the gradual but consistent improvements in my hand function. Dr. Carter, observing my quiet determination and newfound focus, often remarked on my inner strength, mistaking my steely resolve for peaceful acceptance. They were unaware of the hidden battle I was waging, the meticulous data collection, the covert strategizing that consumed my nights. My hands, though still far from their former glory, were slowly regaining function. I could now type for short periods without excessive pain, albeit with a slower, more deliberate pace, allowing me to delve deeper into the digital trails Chloe left behind. Meanwhile, Chloe's social media presence exploded. Her feeds were a meticulously curated showcase of her journey. Glamorous photo shoots in opulent settings, snippets from rehearsals where she commanded a stage, behind-the-scenes glimpses of her working with renowned collaborators who, my quiet research revealed, were mostly struggling artists desperate for exposure, paid meagerly by Chloe's venture. She cultivated an image of the driven, visionary artist, a stark contrast to my quiet, unseen struggle for basic hand function. What struck me most was her constant, almost pathological need for validation. Every post was fishing for compliments, every interview a thinly veiled plea for adoration. She basked in the reflected glory of her parents' investment, conveniently omitting any mention of where those funds had truly originated. My parents, acting as her unwitting publicists, amplified her every success, forwarding her press releases to their entire contact list, defending her artistic choices to skeptical friends, and even dismissing subtle criticisms from family acquaintances as simply envy. Behind the glittering facade, however, I sensed cracks. Chloe's revolutionary music venture was consuming vast amounts of capital, far more than even her inflated projections suggested. My discreet inquiries, made through anonymous online forums and public company registries, revealed a pattern of increasingly desperate financial maneuvers. She was taking out short-term loans from predatory lenders, using future, unconfirmed ticket sales as collateral, and even quietly selling off pieces of inherited jewelry, family heirlooms my mother had always cherished and intended for both of us, to cover mounting production costs. Her collaborators were starting to grumble about delayed payments and breach of contract. I even heard through the grapevine, a distant cousin who worked in entertainment law and sometimes heard whispers in the industry, that one of her principal dancers had threatened to walk out over an unpaid contract and unsafe working conditions. The guaranteed success she had promised our parents was beginning to look less like a sure thing and more like a house of cards teetering on the brink of collapse. My deep dive into Chloe's financial dealings yielded a trove of damning evidence. I uncovered a pattern of increasingly aggressive marketing tactics, bordering on outright misrepresentation, to sell tickets and attract last-minute investors. She promised exclusive behind-the-scenes access and once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunities that were thinly veiled attempts to extract more money from unsuspecting patrons. I even found evidence of her overpromising investor returns that were wildly unrealistic, bordering on fraudulent. Her ambition had mutated into a dangerous blend of desperation and delusion. The new music venture was not just struggling, it was bleeding money, kept alive only by a continuous stream of new, unsuspecting capital. The internal accounting documents I managed to access through a surprisingly lax security system, a testament to Chloe's overconfidence and incompetence, painted a grim picture. Spiraling debts, unpaid contractors, and a growing list of furious creditors. It was financial recklessness bordering on outright fraud. The truth was far uglier than I had imagined. Chloe wasn't just selfish. She was dangerous, a liability to anyone who placed their trust in her. The idea for my counterstrike began to form, a complex, multi-layered plan that would leverage Chloe's own weaknesses against her. I wasn't interested in direct confrontation or messy legal battles that would drain my already limited resources and inflict more emotional pain on our parents, who were already suffering enough. My goal was karmic retribution, a consequence that would arise naturally from Chloe's own actions, one that would expose her deceit without my direct, visible intervention. I started by anonymously leaking carefully selected, non-incriminating pieces of information to online forums frequented by independent music critics and industry insiders. Whispers of questionable financial management and overly aggressive marketing tactics began to circulate, subtle currents that stirred the waters. I compiled a discreet dossier of publicly accessible records news articles about past failed ventures of Chloe's less reputable collaborators, vague industry rumors about her past financial missteps, and financial irregularities from her current venture that were technically public but buried deep in obscure databases, and sent it, again anonymously, to a few prominent arts journalists known for their investigative prowess. I knew they would do their own digging, their own verifying. I was simply providing them with the initial breadcrumbs, knowing their journalistic instincts would lead them to the feast. The beauty of this approach lay in its indirectness. If Chloe or my parents tried to trace the source, they would find nothing. My digital footprint was meticulously erased, my communications untraceable. I was a phantom, an unseen force gently nudging the pieces into place. I wanted Chloe to experience the slow, agonizing unraveling of her carefully constructed facade, to feel the crushing weight of her own deceit without ever knowing who was pulling the strings. My revenge wouldn't be a dramatic aria, but a creeping dissonance, a subtle shift in harmony that would eventually lead to complete cacophony. The world was about to witness a performance of justice, choreographed by the hands they thought were broken, and it would be Chloe's most unforgettable and tragic show. As the premiere date for Chloe's new music venture loomed closer, the subtle dissonance I had introduced began to amplify. The whispers I had seeded in online forums and through anonymous tips to journalists started to coalesce into tangible questions. Independent music critics, piqued by the anonymous breadcrumbs, began asking pointed questions in their preliminary reviews, delving not just into the artistic merit of the production, but also into the increasingly opaque financial structures supporting it. One particularly influential blog, known for its deep dives into arts funding and its scathing exposés, published a cautious but critical piece titled, "Is the Opera of Illusions Too Good to Be True?" Unpacking its financial foundation. The article didn't accuse directly, but it highlighted the unusually high investment figures for a debut production, the lack of transparent financial reporting, and the curious, labyrinthine nature of the funding sources. My parents, still caught in the vortex of Chloe's promotional hype, dismissed it as jealousy or misguided criticism. "People just don't understand true artistic innovation, darling," my mother assured Chloe over the phone, completely unaware of the precise and meticulously sourced information that had informed the journalists' doubts. They clung to the narrative of Chloe as a misunderstood genius, a victim of envious detractors. My physical therapy continued, a quiet, methodical counterpoint to the growing chaos surrounding Chloe. My hands were healing slowly but steadily. I could now play simple scales and arpeggios on a practice keyboard, albeit with considerable effort, lingering discomfort, and an altered technique. Each note was a small triumph, a testament to my resilience and Dr. Reed's expertise. Dr. Carter, observing my improved mood and renewed focus, attributed it to my body's healing, unaware of the deeper, darker satisfaction I was finding in the unfolding events. I maintained a low profile, deliberately avoiding all of Chloe's pre-premiere events, citing my fragile recovery and the need to avoid crowds. This suited my parents, as it meant one less potential distraction from Chloe's all-consuming needs and demands. They seemed to prefer me out of the way, a neatly contained problem. Meanwhile, Chloe's desperation became palpable to anyone outside her immediate, adoring circle. Her previously confident, almost arrogant demeanor frayed at the edges. She snapped at her crew, threw dramatic tantrums during rehearsals over minor issues, and became increasingly paranoid about leaks and saboteurs. She even accused one of her most loyal dancers of being a spy when a minor costume malfunction occurred, leading to a tearful confrontation backstage. The stress took a visible toll on her. She lost a considerable amount of weight, dark circles appeared beneath her eyes, and her once pristine vocal delivery, which she had so diligently guarded, began to show signs of strain, a slight waver on her high notes. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was constantly on the phone, her voice hushed, arguing vehemently with suppliers over unpaid invoices and threatening to sue contractors for breach of contract, all transparent attempts to deflect from her own financial mismanagement. Her revolutionary vision was collapsing under the unsustainable weight of its own ambition and deceit. The internal accounting documents I had managed to obtain, combined with my ongoing research into public records and industry chatter, painted a truly grim picture. The new music venture was not just struggling, it was hemorrhaging money at an alarming rate, kept alive only by a continuous stream of new, unsuspecting capital from desperate last-minute investors Chloe managed to charm. Her promises of exponential returns were baseless, built on sand. The final blow came not from me, not directly, but from a source entirely outside my manipulation, though connected by the ripples of Chloe's own past actions. A former investor, a wealthy but notoriously impatient businessman named Mr. Harrison, who had invested a significant sum in Chloe's previous, smaller and largely failed projects, had grown suspicious of her repeated requests for bridge funding for the Opera of Illusions. He had heard the whispers from the anonymous blog posts and decided to conduct his own due diligence. He hired a private investigator to look into Chloe's new music venture. The investigator was thorough and quickly uncovered the true extent of Chloe's financial recklessness. The elaborate network of shell companies, the grossly inflated invoices for services never rendered, the substantial loans secured against non-existent future profits, and most damningly, the deliberate misallocation of investor funds for personal lavish expenditures, including those exorbitant private vocal lessons with the renowned coach she'd always coveted in Milan. Expenses clearly marked as talent development for the venture. The investigator also stumbled upon the initial investment documents signed by my parents, noting the unusually unfavorable terms for them and how their funds, meant for my long-term care, had been absorbed into Chloe's speculative, fraudulent venture. Mr. Harrison, furious at being misled and facing significant losses, filed a massive civil lawsuit for fraud and breach of contract. Even more devastatingly, he forwarded his comprehensive findings to a prominent financial news outlet, one with a national reach and a reputation for breaking high-profile business scandals. The story broke less than 48 hours before Chloe's grand premiere, a scathing exposé titled Opera of Deceit. Investor funds and family trust at risk in the Opera of Illusions. It detailed every fraudulent maneuver, every financial deception, and explicitly mentioned the questionable diversion of funds intended for a family member's critical medical care, weaving my silent suffering into the public narrative of her downfall. It was a public execution of Chloe's career, meticulously laid out for the world to see, backed by irrefutable evidence. The reverberations were immediate and cataclysmic. Tickets for the premiere were canceled en masse. Investors besieged the production office, demanding immediate refunds. The prestigious arts festival abruptly canceled Chloe's entire run, issuing a terse public statement distancing themselves from her unethical practices and ongoing legal issues. The new music venture was immediately put into receivership, its assets frozen, its future shattered. Chloe's collaborators, many of whom had been unpaid for months, abandoned the project en masse, some even joining the chorus of angry accusers. Her meticulously crafted image as a visionary artist disintegrated overnight, replaced by headlines branding her a con artist and a cheat. She became a pariah in the opera world, her name synonymous with scandal and disgrace. And most painful of all, my parents, seeing their names implicated in the scandal and their life savings evaporated, finally understood the true depth of Chloe's betrayal. The premiere was thrown into chaos, a symphony of collapsing ambitions, all thanks to the very deceitful chords Chloe herself had played. The day of Chloe's premiere was not a celebration, but a catastrophe of operatic proportions. The financial news exposé had spread like wildfire, picked up by major national and international outlets, turning Chloe's highly anticipated debut into a public spectacle of fraud and deceit. The Grand Theater, once buzzing with eager anticipation and the scent of expensive perfumes, was instead filled with angry ticket holders demanding refunds, bewildered journalists scrambling for quotes, and a handful of loyalists, mostly paid publicists, trying to shield a sobbing, hysterical Chloe from the relentless media frenzy. My parents, Robert and Susan, who had arrived early, dressed in their finest evening attire, expecting to bask in the glow of their daughter's triumph, were instead confronted with the devastating reality of her duplicity and the public humiliation that now clung to their family name. I watched the unfolding disaster from the quiet solitude of my apartment, having chosen not to attend the public spectacle. I didn't need to be there in person. The live news reports provided a vivid, almost cinematic account of the chaos. My mother, Susan, was reportedly seen openly weeping in the lobby, clutching her face, her carefully styled hair disheveled. My father, Robert, looked utterly defeated, his usual confident, stoic demeanor shattered, his shoulders slumped as he tried to fend off aggressive reporters. The headlines screamed, "Opera of Deceit, Diva's Downfall, Family Fortune Lost to Fraud." The immediate fallout was immense and unforgiving. The prestigious arts festival, once so keen to showcase Chloe's talent, abruptly canceled her entire run, issuing a public statement distancing themselves from her unethical practices and ongoing legal issues. Investors, furious and feeling utterly duped, filed multiple lawsuits, demanding not just their money back but also punitive damages for fraud and misrepresentation. The new music venture was immediately put into receivership, its assets frozen, its future shattered beyond repair. Chloe's collaborators, many of whom had been unpaid for months or discovered their own names implicated in her shady dealings, abandoned the project en masse, some even joining the chorus of angry accusers and providing additional evidence to the authorities. Her meticulously crafted image as a visionary artist disintegrated overnight, replaced by damning headlines branding her a con artist and a cheat. She became a pariah in the opera world, her name synonymous with scandal and a cautionary tale. My parents were, for the first time in my life, utterly speechless. Their endless phone calls to Chloe went unanswered, or were met with Chloe's own hysterical accusations and blame shifting. When they finally managed to corner her, either in a brief, fraught visit or a desperate video call, she was defensive, lashing out, blaming everyone but herself. It's a conspiracy, they're all jealous of my talent. Those journalists are just trying to ruin me because I was too brilliant. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the financial news article even subtly highlighted the unusual circumstances surrounding their initial investment, hinting at the true source of the funds that had kickstarted Chloe's fraudulent enterprise, the very funds meant for my medical care. My mother eventually called me, her voice trembling, almost unrecognizable. The usual brightness was gone, replaced by a raw, hollow sound. "Lena," she choked out, it's all true, the money, she took it, and ours too. We've lost everything, everything we saved." It was the first time she had acknowledged the depth of Chloe's betrayal, and crucially, the impact it had on my life, on my financial security that had been taken for granted. She didn't have to say it explicitly, but the understanding was clear. Her blind faith in Chloe had not only ruined their own financial stability, but had also actively contributed to my suffering. I listened calmly, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over me. "I know, Mom," I replied, my voice steady, devoid of the emotion I had so carefully suppressed for months. "I've known for a while." This seemed to stun her into silence, a brief, sharp intake of breath. The conversation was brief, punctuated by her quiet sobs on the other end of the line. She didn't ask how I knew, or why I hadn't told them sooner. The realization seemed to hit her that her blind faith in Chloe had not only ruined their own financial stability, but had also actively contributed to my suffering, a painful awakening to their own complicity. My father called later, his voice hoarse, strained. He didn't offer apologies, not yet, but his tone was devoid of the usual defensiveness when discussing Chloe. The bravado, the endless justifications for her behavior had vanished. We're going to need help, Lena," he admitted, a rare moment of stark vulnerability from a man who had always prided himself on his self-sufficiency. "Legal advice." "Everything," I simply told him I'd consider it, leaving the ball squarely in their court. I would not rescue them blindly, just as they had not rescued me. In the quiet aftermath, I reflected on the intricate chain of events that had led to this moment. My initial goal had not been to destroy Chloe, but to expose her, to see justice served for the financial and emotional injury she had inflicted upon me, and by extension, upon our parents. The karmic backlash, however, had been far more comprehensive and devastating than I could have orchestrated myself. Chloe's own unchecked greed, her profound selfishness, and her dangerous delusion had led her to build a house of cards that collapsed under its own flimsy weight, expedited only by the subtle nudges I had provided. Her public disgrace was a direct consequence of her own fraudulent actions. Her vocal cords, once her greatest asset, now metaphorically silenced by the clamor of her failures and the legal proceedings that would undoubtedly ensue. As for my hands, they were making remarkable progress. The physical therapy was working wonders. The constant searing pain was receding, the nerves slowly regenerating, tingling with newfound sensation. I could now play simple melodies on the piano, tentatively, imperfectly, but with a newfound joy that surpassed my former ambition for grand concert halls. The music might sound different now, a little less polished, a little more deliberate, but it was mine again, composed not for an audience but for my own healing heart. The grand pause in Chloe's career was a jarring silence that finally allowed me to hear my own inner melody, strong and clear. In the weeks and months following Chloe's spectacular downfall, our family dynamic underwent a seismic, painful shift. The initial shock and devastation experienced by my parents, Robert and Susan, slowly gave way to a painful, often awkward reckoning. They were financially crippled, their retirement plans in ruins, their social standing severely tarnished by Chloe's brazen fraud. The lawsuits from investors and creditors were piling up, a relentless tide that threatened to drown them. They found themselves implicated due to their unwitting co-signing on some of Chloe's more dubious loans, and the legal fees alone were astronomical. They were eventually forced to sell their beloved family home, a a place brimming with decades of memories, both cherished and now, tragically, tainted, to cover a portion of their legal bills and partially satisfy angry creditors. It was a stark, brutal consequence of their blind favoritism and misplaced trust in a daughter who had only ever truly served herself. The grand piano that had been in our living room since I was a child, a silent witness to my hours of practice and Chloe's fleeting interest, was sold with the house, another echo of loss. Chloe, meanwhile, retreated into a self-imposed isolation, fueled by shame and defiance. She was facing multiple civil lawsuits, and the looming threat of criminal charges for fraud was a dark cloud over her future. The opera world, once her fervent ambition, had utterly rejected her, closing its doors with a resounding thud. Her phone calls to our parents, once demanding and self-centered, became desperate pleas for help, then eventually ceased altogether as she faced the harsh reality of her solitude. She was left with nothing but her tarnished reputation, a mountain of debt, and the profound realization that her guaranteed success had been a mirage built on deceit. It was a bleak, hollow victory for me, not one filled with triumphant glee, but with a quiet sense of tragic completion. The scales had been balanced, but the price had been heavy for everyone involved. My parents, stripped of their illusions and their wealth, finally turned to me, not for financial assistance, which I could not offer, but for emotional support and, crucially, for guidance. My mother, Susan, would call, her voice no longer chirpy and effervescent, but quiet and filled with a profound remorse. "Lena," she'd say, her voice barely a whisper, I don't know how we could have been so blind, so foolish. We were so caught up in her dreams, we didn't see what she was truly doing." My father, Robert, the stoic one, visibly aged by the ordeal, finally admitted the depth of his regret during a strained dinner at my small apartment. "We put all our hopes in Chloe," he confessed, his gaze fixed on his hands, "and we failed to see what was right in front of us. Your talent, your dedication. You were always the truly gifted one, and we took you for granted. We thought you'd always be fine on your own." The words, though years too late, were like a balm on an old, festering wound. They were not just apologizing for Chloe's actions, but for a lifetime of overlooking me, of dismissing my achievements, of neglecting my needs. It was a long-awaited acknowledgement, a moment that shifted the ground beneath us. I began to facilitate their legal consultations, using the meticulous research I had conducted on Chloe's business dealings to help their lawyers navigate the complex web of fraud. I didn't offer them money, for I had little to spare, but I offered my time, my knowledge, and a detached, professional perspective. It was a difficult process, fraught with emotional landmines. There were moments when old resentments flared, when I wanted to scream, "I told you so, I warned you." But I held back, recognizing that their suffering was genuine, and that true healing for all of us required a different approach, one that moved beyond blame and into a space of cautious rebuilding. I focused on trying to rebuild a relationship with them based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than continuing the toxic cycle of accusation and defense. My own recovery continued to flourish, a testament to my resilience and the unwavering support of my medical team. Dr. Reed was astounded by my progress, noting the remarkable nerve regeneration and the return of significant dexterity. I could now play complex pieces, albeit with a slower tempo and an altered technique that accommodated the lingering limitations in my hands. The piano became my sanctuary once more, not a stage for public performance, but a private space for self-expression and healing. I found a new passion, one born from my adversity, teaching adaptive piano to students with injuries, neurological conditions, or disabilities. Sharing my journey and my newfound techniques, I found immense fulfillment in helping others reclaim their own musical voices. It was a fulfilling path, one that resonated deeply with my own experience of overcoming profound physical and emotional trauma. The resonant echo of Chloe's downfall continued to reverberate through our family, forcing a painful but necessary reevaluation of values, priorities, and dynamics. My parents, stripped of their illusions and their wealth, began to see me not as the quiet, reliable daughter they could take for granted, but as the strong, resilient woman who had navigated immense personal and financial trauma with dignity, integrity, and surprising foresight. They started listening, truly listening, to my needs, my opinions, my life. They visited me not just to update me on Chloe's legal woes, but to genuinely connect, to ask about my work, my students' progress, and my personal dreams. The strained silence that once defined our relationship began to fill with tentative but genuine conversations, slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding a fragile bridge of trust. The music of my life was finding a new harmony, one born not of perfection or effortless talent, but of perseverance and the hard-won clarity that comes from profound loss and eventual healing. 1 year after the spectacular collapse of Chloe's new music venture and her subsequent legal woes, a new, tentative harmony settled over our family. My parents had downsized drastically, moving into a modest apartment in a quieter neighborhood. They were still dealing with the protracted financial repercussions, the lingering debts from Chloe's fraud, but the immediate crisis had passed, and the emotional scars, though still present, were slowly beginning to heal. Chloe, after a plea deal, was serving a short sentence, her public life and artistic aspirations utterly demolished. While I didn't actively seek to communicate with her, and frankly felt no desire to, I no longer felt the burning need for retribution. Her own actions and the justice system had delivered a comprehensive form of karma. My focus had irrevocably shifted. My hands, though forever changed by the accident and the extensive rehabilitation, had found their own rhythm. I could play with surprising agility, adapting my technique to compensate for lingering nerve issues and minor stiffness. I had, in a way, developed my own unique style, one born from necessity and innovation. My focus had shifted entirely from the competitive world of concert performance to the deeply rewarding realm of teaching and advocating for adaptive music education. My private studio was thriving, filled with students whose challenges mirrored my own and whose progress brought me immense quiet joy. I developed a unique curriculum, blending traditional piano techniques with therapeutic exercises, and even published articles in occupational therapy journals about my methods, which quickly gained recognition in the field. It was a career born from adversity, but one that resonated with my deepest values of compassion and contribution. My relationship with my parents continued to evolve, step by halting step. The initial conversations, born of their desperation and regret, slowly transformed into genuine connection. My mother, Susan, no longer mentioned Chloe's talent or her grand, failed dreams. Instead, she spoke of my accomplishments, my students' successes, and the quiet satisfaction she found in watching me thrive in my new path. She called regularly, not just for updates, but for real conversations, asking about my day, my thoughts, my feelings. My father, Robert, who had always been distant and emotionally reserved, began to seek out my advice on practical matters, valuing my clear-headedness and resilience. He even started attending my students' recitals, his presence in the back row a silent but powerful acknowledgement of my chosen path and his newfound pride. They showed up for my milestones, a major grant I received for my adaptive music program, a speaking engagement at a national conference not out of obligation, but out of genuine pride and respect. It was a profound shift, one that slowly, painstakingly, restored a measure of trust and respect that had been absent for so long. The bitterness I had harbored for so long began to recede, replaced by a quiet acceptance of our imperfect but now honest family. I also forged new, meaningful connections outside the confines of my family. My physical therapist, Dr. Evelyn Reed, and neurologist, Dr. Ben Carter, became not just colleagues but trusted friends, collaborators in my adaptive music work. Dr. Carter, a jazz enthusiast in his spare time, even began taking adaptive piano lessons from me, finding a new appreciation for the instrument through my unique approach. Through my teaching, my advocacy work, and my growing professional network, I met other talented musicians, dedicated therapists, and innovative educators, building a vibrant community of support and shared passion. My life, though profoundly different from the one I had meticulously planned, was undeniably richer, more authentic, and filled with a deeper sense of purpose than I had ever known. I felt a sense of liberation, free from the constant need to prove myself, free from the shadow of comparison, free from the toxic dynamics that had once defined my family. At my studio's annual spring recital, held in a cozy community hall, my parents sat proudly in the front row, their faces etched with quiet admiration. As my most advanced adaptive student, a young woman who had lost a limb in an accident, flawlessly performed a Chopin prelude using a custom-designed pedal extension I had helped develop, my mother quietly wiped away a tear, not of sorrow, but of profound emotion. Later, during the reception, my father approached me, a rare look of profound pride in his eyes. "Lena," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "we were so wrong about so many things. We are so incredibly proud of the woman you've become. You've taught us more about strength, about true talent, and about what really matters in life than we ever taught you." He paused, then added, You've made us better people, Lena." They embraced me, a long, genuine hug that felt different from any we'd shared before, free of expectation or subtle manipulation. It was a hug of pure, unadulterated affection and respect. Reflecting on the entire tumultuous journey, I realized the accident had not been the end of my music, but a profound, albeit painful, catalyst for a new, more resonant composition. The physical shattering of my hands and the subsequent emotional and financial betrayal had forced me to rebuild not just my physical dexterity, but my entire understanding of family, ambition, self-worth, and ultimately forgiveness. The silence that had once engulfed me, the bitter discord of betrayal, had ultimately given way to a sustained harmony, one built on the fragile but real foundations of truth, humility, and mutual respect. My life was no longer about proving my worth to others, but about living authentically, composing my own unique melody, and finding joy in the quiet echoes of compassion and genuine connection. The stage of my life might be smaller now, the applause less thunderous, but the music was richer, more meaningful, and entirely my own. Have you ever experienced similar situations and feelings of betrayal, only to find an unexpected path to healing and purpose? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched something in you, make sure to subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear that sometimes. The most profound healing begins when the loudest, most painful notes of betrayal finally fade, allowing a new, truer harmony to emerge from within. Thank you for listening, and remember that even when the music stops, your own unique melody continues to play on, waiting for you to find a new way to compose it.